Hello again, Steve here with a few comments about the potential origins of Freemasonry. I mean, although ostensibly it originates, according to Freemasons, way back to Egypt and the building of the pyramids and all this sort of stuff, but in terms of the organization of it, there seems to be, some credibility given towards the who were the Knights Templar, who were a Catholic order of warring monks, basically, and who financed some of the Crusades, and how they had been, the king took them over or whatever, and because he needed money to fight his wars, and then they escaped. Some of them sailed out to Amar, to the sea, which is, some people say that's where the word America comes from. To the sea is Amar in Spanish, because they had a fleet there, the Knight Templars did, apparently. And then some people say some of them went up to Scotland, where they formed the Scottish Freemasons and so on. So, I mean, there's a lot of mystery around this, and that's part of the lore of this whole Freemason thing, right, is to keep everything kind of a little bit mysterious. But I'm reading this book, still reading it, just plugging along, among other things, with J.L. Talman, The Origins of Totalitarian Democracy, and I noticed something fairly interesting in there, which was that there was this key player in there. His name is Buonarroti, I believe his name is. And he was known as the high priest of egalitarian communism, of early egalitarian communism. He was an Italian who basically became a Frenchman, and he was very much he was in the following Babeuf, and I believe he was quite instrumental during the time of the Nine Thermidor, which was the reign of terror and whatnot. He was front and center of all that. And he was financed by a guy named Helvetic, I believe it was, who was one of the Philosophes, who was a Freemason. And I thought that was kind of interesting when I saw that. And of course, I even remember back for my brief stint in a Freemasonic lodge, which is, quite a few years ago now. And it was the old guys there. They had this sort of admiration for communist revolutionaries, and in particular the Castro revolution of Cuba. And they made a big deal that Raúl Castro was a Freemason, and the Castros, they were very tolerant towards Freemasonry, and Freemasonry was alive and well in Cuba and all this sort of stuff. And of course, when you look it up too, the Freemasons were quite involved in early, Trotsky apparently was quite a studier, at least, of Freemasonry, and as well as many others were in the Soviet era of communism. But then again, it was outlawed by a lot of communist states, as many things were that would be potential competitors, right? And of course, the non-equal nature of Freemasonry might have run counter to them, because they did things behind closed doors, and it was exclusionary and to those, etc. And that's not very egalitarian, I guess. But it fascinated me in my early those few months that I poked around the idea of Freemasonry and was actually in a lodge for a bit, and how this huge mistrust between the Catholic Church and the Freemasons. In fact, up until I think it was 1982 or 1980 something, when Pope John Paul II sort of edited canon law. He edited excommunication for being a Freemason out of canon law to I think it's a level of high censure or something, but it's definitely recommended to not be. And also, the Freemasons always had this suspicion of Catholics. In fact, up till they never had a prohibition on Catholics joining, but there was a suspicion there, and I suspected, because people knew that that's what I came out of, there was one guy in there who seemed to be quite suspicious of me. And he actually told me that he considered kicking me out of the lodge, which when I mentioned it to somebody else, I was quite surprised. It's pretty funny, actually. And but I'm suspicious when I'm reading this book, and because it's very intriguing about the origins and how these people were nuts. And of course, the early communists, they went against the church, right? So sometimes, it reminds me a little bit of how the left likes to side with Islam, in terms of, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and then they'll turn on him. So it might have been that, even in early Soviet times, the Freemasons didn't like the Catholics, the communists didn't like the Catholics, so they were friends until the communists took over, and then they threw the Freemasons under the bus. And of course, Trotsky had to go running pretty fast. And others, of course, right? So I'm thinking that might have been just what it was, and for some reason there was enough of them in Cuba, and maybe it's true. Maybe Raúl Castro was a Freemason, and then Fidel, didn't want to make it look like he was persecuting those who would be kindred brothers of his brother, you might say, right? So. So yeah, and another thing too that I think was interesting is that when I was reading this book, I just read a little line here which sounded very, very Masonic in a way. It's talking about how this guy, Bouvari, or is that his name? No, Buonarroti, this very senior agitator within the French Revolution. And so after the Thermidor, which was the Reign of Terror, they were kind of overthrown by, I guess, prototypes of Bonaparte's people, I guess, who restored a lot of the order that the revolutionaries had created, or had restored more order from the chaos that the revolution had created. And a lot of these people were then outlawed. So it goes on to talk about this. So it says that Buonarroti was a prototype of those revolutionary prophets who were to spend the major part of their lives in prison or exile, while the police of half of Europe in a concerted pursuit of them. Men made of steel, which that's interesting. That's what it says in here, and it's interesting that Joseph Stalin took on the name Stalin. It wasn't actually his name. Stalin means man of steel. I wonder if we got that from there. So men of steel, never broken by torture, never weakened by failure or indifference, never enticed by allurement. Members, now that sounds like a bit of propaganda, doesn't it? It sounds like propaganda of Stalin, the man who always works. He used to leave his light on all night at his office near whatever it is, Red Square. So, never enticed by allurement. Members, or rather leaders, of an international confraternity with hidden cells, integral papers, secret meetings, mysterious rites and symbols, waiting in ceaseless vigil for the day. It sounds very, the day in capital T and capital D, very religious in nature, as Freemasonry is, even though they say they're not a religion, even though communists say they're not a religion. They're definitely religious in nature. But that sounds very similar. Meeting in secret, secret handshakes, secret rites and rituals, and all this sort of stuff. And it's interesting that the financier of this guy, this main guy, was a Mason. Now, what that means, I don't know. Maybe if somebody out there listening to this, I'm not saying this as some sort of a conspiracy theory. I just find it fascinating. If somebody's got some more information to enlighten me on this, that would be great. So I just wanted to bring that up. I wanted to bring that up because it's interesting, because my initial interest in this was why? What is the origin of this huge amount of mistrust between the Masons and the Catholic Church? Okay, if both are big organizations, then they're competitors in a way. That's for sure. But also there was some really nasty deeds done, if you study up on it, between the two. I mean, if it's true that the Knights Templars were basically expunged by the Catholics, well, obviously they're going to be against them, right? And then, of course, once this Thermidor came around, if it was backed and financed by certain people who were Masons, then they went just guillotine happy on the Catholics, on the Catholic organization, because the Catholics were seen as being in bed with the royals, which they always were, of course, because you always had this mix of church and state, right? And this revolution basically expunged that out. So there's a lot of bad blood between the two, and it lasted, and still lasts in a way, but it certainly lasted up until the 80s. It was written into Catholic canon law that if you were found to be a Mason, that was grounds for, did I say extermination? Excommunication, not extermination, excommunication from the Catholic Church. And still to this day, huge amount of mistrust between the two, and a lot of intrigue, right? I mean, this whole conspiracy theory. I see so much of this fringe stuff on the internet about the Freemasons, and I find it pretty hilarious. But, there might be something to it in terms of the history of this communist agitation. And I just found it interesting too, for the brief time that I was in there, how much interest and respect that the old guys in the lodge gave to these communist agitators like the Castros and like what happened in the Soviet Union and so on. And I just wonder sometimes if there isn't a connection that goes deeper than just a personal interest. Steve here again. Great chatting. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share. And please comment in the box below. Keep them coming. Thank you for those who do chime in and comment. Talk again soon. Bye for now.